Welcome to Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, exploring the future of work. Find out what's going on, disruptions, evolutions, opportunities, challenges, and interventions in our multi-generational distributed organizations. With a new tech and talent focus, discover what you need to know to stay upskilled and relevant and ensure your business keeps its competitive edge. Sophie investigates the promise and reality of the future of work now and as we look ahead. She interviews people who are changing work experiences and practices and shares how we can each transition smoothly and successfully to effective and more productive new ways of working.
Hi, in this episode, we're considering office experiences that factor into employees' desires to commute in and support their work performance. What if office buildings were viewed much less like functional boxes and instead through a hospitality lens as enabled community spaces? We talk about the difference between a house and a home. What about the difference between a building and an office? People now have higher expectations and reasonable desires that all the spaces where they work are pleasant, comfortable, connective, and connected. In functionality and features, how can we close that gap more? How can commercial real estate owners and occupiers foster better in-office experiences? What functionality and connectivity are provided? How does your tech stack up? Does it seamlessly enable individual and teamwork, however co-located and distributed employees are as they convene, disperse, and regroup inside and outside the office? How well is community fostered within your office building? What are the levers that landlords, owners, and tenants can use to co-create frictionless and supportive mixed working and social environments for everyone? I'm delighted to be talking with David Abrams, co-founder and CEO of HILO, a platform that is digitizing customer experience to create connected communities of people in buildings. David is also host of TEN, the Tenant Experience Network.
Hi, David. How are you?
I am very well. Thank you. Glad to be here today.
Well, I'm delighted to be chatting with you. I start with where you began and what you studied. It seems very practical and interesting, business accounting and marketing. Why did you choose that?
I guess there are two types of people coming out of high school and heading into college. One that knows exactly what they want to do and one that has no idea what they want to do. And I think I fell into the latter. And
right.
So it took me a little while to sort of find a direction, and eventually thought about marketing and spent some time in the marketing world, and also took some courses in accounting and actually got quite excited about accounting. I know that seems odd, but it was more about the potential to use accounting as a foray into businesses, to be able to understand how businesses operated. And of course, the DNA of every business, of course, are their financials, are their numbers. And I think that that's often overlooked. And so I used that as an opportunity to really better understand the business world, and initially starting out in public accounting, actually, an opportunity to snoop into other people's businesses with permission. And so that was a great foray into the greater business world, and for me to better understand, where my passions and really, where that would take me.
Did you start the collective, this agency? Was that very soon after college, or you went into accounting first?
Correct. So I spent 4 years in public accounting. At that time, I had the opportunity to join this very small marketing agency. At that time, it was struggling, and it was an opportunity to either help them reposition the agency, either for future, success for future generations, or actually to position it for a sale. Oh. What happened was it was an exciting time, and I enjoyed being in the industry and found a certain level of passion for that particular field. And in the process of helping to reposition the agency and build it to a better place, I ended up staying and taking advantage of the opportunity. And it was there in the early days that I was first introduced to commercial real estate.
As part of the agency, you did facilitation to do with strategic planning, this raw society. What was that? Is a collaborative by design and inclusive by nature, freed from traditional thinking. I love that as a concept. What did it actually mean?
That actually came later. So, the early days of agency life was really finding out what industries we could really add value to. And commercial real estate
Hmm.
became one of them, not necessarily related, but we did a lot of work in the not for profit world, which was very satisfying on a personal level to make a contribution back to organizations that were doing something good, doing something great. And what I found over time is that often people rush to the finish line. They rush to,
Okay.
the creative brief, or they rush to the creative presentation. And it was there that they then discovered that perhaps, they lacked the foundation. Perhaps they lacked the critical thinking to be able to analyze,
Hmm.
creatively what we were presenting. And so
Right.
I developed this concept called Raw Society, where we actually, said, hang on, before you hire us as an agency to do the creative and the marketing, let's take a step back and do some of the strategic thinking that is often either missed, forgotten, or simply not invested in. And so we
Sure.
developed a really unique process, very collaborative, very engaging. And what I did actually to support that is I went and became a certified professional facilitator. Because what I found in this world of strategic planning is that there were marketing people doing that, but they didn't have
Hmm.
the facilitation expertise. And when we didn't have raw and we tried to pull a client back before we did creative to do some of that strategic planning, we would end up doing it for nothing. We would end up just bundling
Mm.
it in with our services. When I stripped it
Right.
out and created raw and put a very disciplined approach to it and a more detailed presentation in terms of what the process looked like, who the stakeholders would be, what the outcome would
Hmm.
be, what the deliverables would be, they actually started paying for it. And we ended up doing better work. And so it was a win win.
Fantastic. So this is 2012 onwards. What were the key issues at the time that the real estate industry was going through?
If we go back to that period of time, it really was the early days of the ESG movement and buildings,
Okay.
beginning to think more about the environment, more socially aware of their impact on the environment. It was the early days of buildings getting their LEED certification. And that
Hmm.
really was, a lot of the impetus towards sort of how I began to think about the use of technology in commercial real estate to
Ah,
start
okay.
to change the way in which building operators engaged, connected, communicated with the people
Mm.
that worked and lived in their buildings. So, I think that cities have always been really driven by the economic impact of the built world and the densification in terms of people living and working in central business districts, and creates just an incredible experience and vitality for cities. And I think that it was, we just had the confluence of, yes, more people living and working in the city, but also an understanding of how buildings needed to sort of take up their position in this charge for creating more greener, more sustainable, more environmentally friendly buildings. And this is, that was very early days of that process. And certainly, and we'll talk more about this, I'm sure, later on, but a very, very central topic and theme today.
So, how did the ESG, this aspect of sustainability and technology, change the dynamic in the relationship between the landlords and the tenants? You take my building, I rent it to you, you move in, and you pay me rent and utilities and stuff like that. On a very simplistic way of thinking about it. What were the changes that were happening that then also may have changed the dynamics between the provider and operator of the building and the tenants within it?
So I think in those early days, you referenced 2012, 2013, I think in and around that time, the new thinking was really being driven by the occupant. You had large
Hmm.
occupiers who were definitely thinking about this before even the building did. And they were thinking about just,
Okay.
very basic ESG initiatives like recycling, various consumables within their spaces. And I think that they were starting to lead this charge. And for example, building operators, in those days, one of the ways in which they would communicate with everybody in the building, believe it or not, is they would print brochures, bulletins, newsletters, and they would desk drop them on every, yeah, I know, every single desk in the building, the nighttime cleaning crew would take this printed material and they would drop it on every single person's desk. People would come in the morning one day and the desk would be blanketed with this information. Now, it was effective. It was direct. It worked. But all of a sudden one day, these companies started saying, hey, you know what? This does not jive or reconcile with our own internal practices and policies. We don't want this printed material left on our desks anymore. So all of a sudden, then building operators are going, okay, we'll stop doing that. But now how do we reach this audience in a very direct, real-time way? And that was really the driving sort of the moment in time when I began to think about this as a marketer, working closely with building operators and helping them connect to their tenants and being very responsible for championing that communication channel. I thought, there needs to be a better way. And at that time, everybody was walking around with either an iPhone or a BlackBerry. And I thought, well, why aren't we speaking to people digitally? And for me, that was the beginning of my thought process. Although, again, running a marketing communications agency, I started to think about technology and did not really know that my future would take a very significant twist as I let my mind go down that path.
So how did that twist happen?
Working in commercial real estate, I loved what I did, and I loved the opportunity that I had to support building operators in creating community. And that's really what the smartest and the brightest and the best building operators did. They although they were in the business of renting space, the best of the best did recognize that they had the opportunity to create community and create connection and create an environment that people wanted to be and that people enjoyed being in. And so I got to help develop those marketing strategies and communication strategies to help, foster that relationship.
Even when there were many different companies, it was like trying to create the community between the companies as well in a building?
100%. Building operators recognize that, a tenant occupied a space within a floor or an entire floor. People didn't come to buildings just to enter their space. I like to say that buildings are not silos, right? They're very much part of a neighborhood. They're part of a city, and they create community. So the smartest building operators recognize that they had an opportunity to connect that community, beyond the individual occupier space. That also helped develop a better relationship, deliver a better level of customer service and experience. And the ultimate goal, of course, in any building is retention. It's very expensive to acquire a new tenant. So the longer I can keep my tenants happy, engaged, fulfilled, the better and more successful our building is going to be from an operating income perspective. Building operators want to make sure these buildings are operating at a very profitable level, so the return on investment makes sense. It's millions and billions of dollars invested in physical real estate. It's got to generate a profitable return.
At the same time, people are renewing their leases 10, 15 plus years apart. That's a very long-term community strategy. Or is it just in a typical building, you're always having some floor, partial floor, which is turning over or has the potential to turn over? So these particular building owners you were working with already had a sense of what the space was being used for or could be used for. So I'm trying to understand the evolution of their thinking and interaction with the people within their building.
Well, certainly lease renewals were much longer pre-pandemic. That being said, they don't always start and stop at the same time. So to your earlier point, there is always turnover. Also, within an occupier space, their employee population is always transitioning as well. So there is always the opportunity to create a sense of community and connection within a building. I think that certainly we began to see the signs. Doing the work that we had done for so many years, we just saw the opportunity to introduce technology as a way to do it differently, perhaps better, perhaps more efficiently. Now, the pandemic changed all of that. right? I mean, we launched HILO. We built HILO in 2018. We launched in 2019 in Toronto and Ottawa. The wind was in our sails. We could not have been
Right.
more excited. The early part of 2020 equally as exciting, with investment being made in our company, pitching
Right.
and talking to the biggest and best commercial real estate developers across North America. And literally 4 years ago, last month, over the course of 48 hours, our business sales pipeline goes to zero.
So what did you do?
Fortunately, I had been an entrepreneur my entire career. So I had that
Right.
history to draw on. It wasn't that I had just started HILO. I did have the experience of running the agency and had been through some different market experiences. So, at that point, I had two choices, and both perhaps one more justifiable than the other. One would have been to have given up. And I think many around me would have completely understood that. The other option was to dig in, and with the hope that HILO would be not less relevant, hopefully not
Right.
the same, and with wishful thinking, more relevant. Now, it wasn't that I was looking, to, there are a lot of people that looked at COVID as not a silver lining, but as it was great for their business, or it was great for them personally.
Okay.
It's very hard for me, no
Yeah.
matter how successful people have been. COVID was a horrible worldwide event. People died,
Right.
people were sick, people lost their jobs, people lost their livelihoods. It was a horrible time. But what I had to do was assess, is the potential for HILO going to be the same or better in a post-COVID world? And what will that look like? And of course, we were all guessing for a very, very long period
Right.
of time. Maybe we're still guessing.
As you were trying to guess what it was going to be, however long one anticipated that was going to be, even early on, June, July, people were anticipating or hoping that back to the office. That was before the second wave. As you were formulating a new proposition, what were the experiences, the digitalized experiences? Because, of course, the contactless aspect of it, very much technology driven, would have been a huge part of that, I imagine, or helping companies potentially automate some of their in-office processes in order to make them safer. Because I do remember that very much. What were you focused on at the time?
So first of all, you're quite right that in the early days, we all thought, first we thought the pandemic might be over by, within a few weeks. Then we thought, after the July long weekend, then we looked to Labor Day, then we at least looked to 2021. And the projecting forward, just, we began to stretch that, that vision as to where we were looking. So in the early
Right.
days, I think it was those short little teases that actually kept us going, right, and gave us hope.
Right. Yep.
I don't know why. Maybe it was that we were not, we were not significantly capitalized at that point in time. We did have investment, but we were trying to be very pragmatic as to what we could achieve over this period of time when our buildings literally went dormant for a period of time. But I also thought that some of how the building world was initially responding in terms of some of those early needs that you spoke about, I felt, I don't know why, in my gut, I thought, are these going to be long-term or short-lived? And to what extent do we invest in technology now, when perhaps in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, we return to a more of a sense of normal, or perhaps a more of a sense of what was than what will be. And are these same requirements going to be in play? And, so we did see some early technology come out, to help with, elevator dispatch, and to help with, checking into facilities, and vaccination clearances, and, tracking your whereabouts and so forth. But in my gut, I questioned whether or not this was going to be an ongoing need as we got through the worst of the worst. And I'm glad that in hindsight, I'm kind of glad that I had that feeling, that hunch, because a lot of the technology that we're thinking about now and building now is not, based in that very challenging, very difficult, very stressful COVID moment. So yes, there was some technology that was immediately required to help facilitate some, companies and buildings that did continue to be populated during the worst of times. But for the most part, some of that those early features and early technology, you might not even remember what they were at this point.
And at the same time, there was a thread, an undercurrent, thinking about and designing work differently, or really designing work that was going to be happening back in the office again. And the ones that really were thinking about that were able to start to use the office in a different way and start to use it more effectively for the times that people were coming in. And there's been a huge evolution, I can imagine, for different tenants in different buildings on different floors. They have different operations, they have different people, they have different ways of bringing people together, and they have different workplace policies with a very interesting range of companies that you were looking at and how their executives were thinking about workplace policies and what that space in that building would mean and what they would be doing there. As we're getting into 2022, and we're certainly not in normal territory, there's a lot of tension in the back and forth. And what's that going to mean? What were your beliefs starting to be at that point?
Mm-hmm. Well, fortunately, we were starting to talk with some really smart people, leading the commercial real estate industry and having just led it through a very dark period of time. And they now recognize, and this was, we saw this shift obviously pre-pandemic, but even more so now post-pandemic, where, buildings used to be simply, they were in the business of renting space. That's what building operators did. Mm-hmm. They built physical structures, they rented space, they collected rent, they made sure that the heating was on, the lights were on, the floors were clean, right. And that was their business. Today, They know very clearly their business is far more than that, far more complicated than that, and stretches beyond boundaries that perhaps they would not have necessarily felt were their purview. So they provide the physical box to an occupier. They're done. So They now know that every single person that enters their building is a customer, not just the person that signs the lease. They now know that they are now partners in helping to build out space, to create that space, to support that space with additional services and programs, and not expect every individual tenant to rent all of the space that they need. What does that mean? It means that they're creating more communal spaces, or as a CEO that I recently had on my podcast, Rob Coomer from Kingset Capital, said, touchdown spaces.
Ooh, I like that. Clearly a football fan.
I like that too. But, they recognize that they now have a responsibility to create more spaces in and around their building that their occupiers, the people that rent space, can utilize as well. And those spaces are shared, and the costs of managing and maintaining those spaces are now amortized across multiple partners, and not just a cost borne by the individual user. So it has truly changed the business of what it means to be creating, particularly in the office category, workspaces for people. And it could not be a more exciting time.
Hang on a second. This is really interesting. What you've just said is that I understand that most of my tenants are not going to want or need as much space as they did, which makes more space available that I can then make into communal space and then charge it back to people, giving them a different utilization of the space, but I still get paid for it, but by multiple people. That's brilliant. I mean, that's really effective.
That's right. And I think what the smart landlords have come to accept is that there's two ways to recover that cost. One, they are able to charge premium rents. So the tenant is paying perhaps a higher cost per square foot for a smaller space, but it allows them to provide these additional spaces. as well, every building not only has the space that you pay for your own, but each tenant then pays for their share of the common area spaces. So it just
I love
increases
that.
the common area footprint, and that gets allocated across a much larger denominator, and it's a win-win for everybody.
And it's a win-win for the employees and the companies who are tenants. Firstly, that there are more people for the employees to get to know. Because until we get schedules sorted out, they're going into the office and maybe there's nobody in the office, or there are very few people in the office. Then there are more people that they could connect with and interact with across the different companies. And that a diverse range of companies means that workers in different companies are meeting people from different backgrounds with different roles. I always find that diverse interconnectivity is hugely beneficial for having new connections, new ways of thinking about things, new ideas. Maybe this becomes part of that new serendipitous water cooler. I hate to say it. I hate talking about the water cooler. What are some of the other innovative ways that landlords and also tenants have been thinking about their space and then having to work with the landlord in order to provide them? Because, for example, there's so much more mobility needed. And with that mobility, you need electricity outlets all over the place or in the ceiling so that people can move things around. If you want to have a modular and mobile furniture set or office design, there are a lot of requirements from the building too.
For sure, for sure. And I think connectivity is a huge driver. So it might sound basic. One would think that we shouldn't have to talk any longer about simply having great wireless connectivity, but that obviously from a building perspective is something now that is being taken on so that you can literally travel the entire built experience, from the tallest part of the building down into the concourse, the retail, and into the parking, to ensure that it has optimal connectivity. I think, speaking to your earlier comment, I think that the collaboration between building operator and occupier is what is really going to drive innovation in the built world. And it used to be, again, a very separate relationship. You rented space, you signed your lease, and then you just wanted to make sure you could access that space on a daily, weekly basis.
Right.
But there wasn't a lot of interconnectivity unless there was a problem, unless there was an issue. I think the opportunity that the industry is now rising to, no pun intended, is to collaborate and look at the community that occupies their building as a shared responsibility. And so what we're seeing is a larger investment now in programming, in content, in services, and in staff that are there to offer that white glove experience. So we believe that the office in particular and multifamily are both drawing on what has always naturally been in the hospitality or hotel industry.
Sure.
The hotel industry earns their customers' loyalty each and every day. And I think now the multifamily and office category now understands that they need to be implementing their level of service with the same white glove approach so that they make people happy every day, not just at lease renewal.
So they're in a very different business now, or they're in an additional business, which is very different. Are they staffing with new people or are they retraining their staff? It's such a different business. I'm familiar with this to an extent because in the co-working space, and I've been co-working for a very long time with a company called Neuhaus in New York, and they realized from very early on that they were in the hospitality space. How are they managing this transition to incorporate new divisions of hospitality people? How are they approaching that?
Well, first of all, the office and multifamily categories are all hiring people from the hospitality industry and bringing people over, and their heads of experience or customer service, are often brought in from the hospitality industry. Some of their frontline people now, are people that used to work in the hotel industry. I think that we're working with a couple of incredible developers that have literally built out spaces, programs, services, and staffing, and wrapped all that up with a brand around that offering. That truly, to me, is innovation. And that is, I think, going to be the future, where this is not simply an add-on or a nice to have. It is actually a significant part of their business. And in my own podcast, when I often end my show with asking people in the industry. So, and it's kind of self-serving, but I ask, so what kind of talent or expertise do you think that the commercialization industry is going to be looking for in the future? You know, what kinds of experiences and expertise and skill sets do we need to meet the industry of the future versus, what you've typically staffed for or with in the past? So I think your question is bang on. And I think that it's going to continue to change. And that is really going to drive the way in which buildings continue to respond to this new, this new world of how and where people work.
For developers who are building new buildings, for the A-list, I can imagine that's easier. What about the B and C buildings? Is it the same type of approach? What you're talking about here is reallocating space, repurposing or reframing how space is used. Do you have the same dynamics with lower grade buildings?
Okay, so in my opinion, the potential for the same outcome exists across the spectrum of building sizes. To me, the determinant is not the size of the building, it's the commitment of the ownership. Now, what that means is that you need to take different approaches. In a large triple class A building with more capital available, you can do things within the physical space, put more resources, maybe take a floor out of commission, recommission it into amenity space, and so forth. You spoke about the B and C class building. I think that a building operator, even with a B and C class building that wants to offer a differentiated level of service and experience, they can do so. One of the equalizers is technology. What can bridge that chasm of class of real estate is the use of technology that is available to all and is not only available to the super elite. So
sure,
technology can bridge that gap and can be utilized across the breadth of real estate to provide a higher level of customer experience and service. And to that B and C class building operator, they need to look externally. They need to look across their neighborhoods, look at a local spin studio, look at a local fitness center, look at local restaurants and cafes, look at local communal spaces, and determine how best to partner with them to, again, provide their tenants with access to the kinds of spaces and experiences that they need. So I think you might first conclude that only the triple class A buildings have an advantage, but I actually believe, if done really thoughtfully and carefully and strategically, that all buildings can still compete.
Interesting. I was just at the Running Remote conference in Lisbon and talking with some companies who are rethinking their space, but also rethinking how they're addressing culture and connections and all those type of things. One company had changed how everything was designed and allocated, and one floor became event space. And so they have internal retreats. So they did more retreats, but the retreats were in a different space, but it was also still their space. So they were using that effectively. That actually became a thread for more people focused on these retreats or events, which may also be done in their own existing space. What other changes are happening or that you see or anticipating or you're helping instigate that I haven't asked you about yet?
Well, obviously, we're very excited about the trend in terms of people finding their way back to the physical workplace. We don't think it's a conversation really around mandate or requirement. We really think it's a conversation around where should I work on any given day? Where can great work happen? We believe that the physical workplace has a role in that offering to help make that happen. And we're excited about how we're utilizing technology to just deliver a better experience to people when they choose to enter the built world. And what we're finding, what's really driving a lot of our thinking and a lot of our innovation is trying to reduce friction, trying to make it even easier and better for people to engage in physical workplaces. And so We don't see a future where people need multiple apps and multiple websites and multiple portals to access and connect with, their building, the building where they work, the building where they live. Once they get into the building,
Right.
How they order their coffee, and how they access their own occupier space, how they engage with different spaces within their own suite, how they reserve boardrooms, and so forth. What's happened is that the technology stack has become very fractured, very complicated, and because we have occupiers driving, the technological advancements, and we have building operators driving the technological advancements. We have, two very large technology stacks that are not necessarily even connected or talking to each other. So we're thinking a lot about how we can put the power of personalization into the hands of the individual, and how they over time can use technology to better connect and engage with all of the various spaces and places in their lives, and not have it be top-down driven, i.e., use this app for that, use this website for this, use this portal. How do we put the power into the hands of the user where they can adopt technology, configure it in a way that is meaningful to them, and enhance their personal experience?
I'm also interested in activity-based working. Do you see both tenants and landlords thinking and talking about that? Because it is 30 plus years old, the idea of how workspaces are used in different ways for different work activities. Are you seeing that type of research and data that is longstanding being utilized now to good effect?
I think we're somewhere between first and second base in this whole evolution. And I think that there needs to be I think there needs to be more consideration and more done. I just saw a post on social media literally this week where someone talked about their experience in having to come back to the workplace. And they're coming back, let's say Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the same days as everybody else. And they're having to reserve a place to sit. And they're fighting to get into the system early enough to find a place to sit. They're having to bring everything that they need that day. And then they have to take everything that they needed back home. This is not creating a good experience. I'm sorry. So I just think there's a lot of strategies that have been employed pre-pandemic and continue to be employed, like hoteling, which I struggle with, that I don't think are going to create the kind of experience that we want. And so your notion of activity-based, I think people need to come together for the right reasons, in the right environments, with the right people, to do the right kind of work. And I think we have a long way to go to trying to really figure out the time and place and how we should come and where we should be. There are some people that can naturally just come together each and every day, and they have the right environment and the right experience that's being offered, and with the right people, and it's not as big or as difficult a subject. But for some, this is a really, really complicated issue. And rather than just say, I never want to go back to the workplace, which I think is a kind of personally a sad state, I think more work needs to be done and more consideration needs to be given to the type of work, the people, the teams, the company, what you're building, what you're creating, a whole bunch of variables. It's not a simple discussion by any means.
There's 8%, or maybe it's up to 15%, that really want to be working remotely 100% of the time. There is a reasonable sized portion now that isn't going into the office because they don't trust their employer and they don't trust that the whatever policy is going to be changed. And that certainly is not a positive situation to be in. There is data now, I think, from BCG that says where there's a flexible policy, compliance is much higher, i.e. that people do come in when they're given more choice and autonomy. If you're talking to a company, to the executives who are looking to, let's assume that they don't have a mandate for a second, but they have some kind of flexibility in their hybrid model, and they're trying to create the right spaces. How should they be approaching their workspace and creating the type of environment that is going to be most attractive and supportive of performance and well-being and all these other things that are going to help their business and their workforce?
Well, listen, I'm not an expert on the the design and the physicality of the space, and certainly there are experts in that field, and they are they're working overtime right now. And what a great opportunity for that
Right.
industry to, reinvent itself and provide more value and do some wonderful things. From my perspective, since it's, our focus is really around experience. And so that's where I think that
Mm-hmm.
both the occupier and the landlord have to be collaborative and have to be thinking about the overall experience that they create. And that experience starts from when someone wakes up in the morning to someone, potentially when they go
Okay.
to bed at night. And all the various touch points that individual goes through is an opportunity to up the level of experience. And, looking at
Okay.
technology, looking at programming, looking at content, looking at services, looking at staffing, there are so many ways in which we can impact on the delivery of that experience. And so for me, I would say, I think building, the occupier and the landlord need to be open-minded. They need to think beyond
Right.
just the work that needs to get done and start to think about creating an
Mm-hmm.
experience that will support great work. And that's a conversation, and
Okay.
that's a collaboration, again, not only between the building operator and the occupier, but also the people that work there. We need to
Right.
constantly engage
Right.
them in this process and have them take ownership to, ultimately what they see. And I think then they will be much more satisfied with the outcome as well.
I love that. To co-create the new experiences in the building space that, as you're saying, also involves communal space across different companies and the different occupiers on the different floors. That's a really positive development, right? It's much more about community, about your office location community, not just your own company. And I think that's very positive. Thank you so much, David, for sharing all that you have. It's been great to understand how the evolution has happened from marketing and technology and now into the spaces in terms of how people are interacting and experiencing their work. So thank you very much for your time.
It's been my pleasure. It's always fun to connect with you. I enjoyed the conversation, and I hope this will lead to more discussion in the future and a collaboration and conversation around how the future of work continues to evolve. So thanks so much for including me.
Absolutely.
Thanks again so much to David Abrams, co-founder and CEO of HILO and host of TEN, the Tenant Experience Network. You can follow David on LinkedIn and find out more about HILO by visiting the website at hiloapp.com, hiloapp.com, and on Instagram at HILOapp. You can find the Tenant Experience Network on YouTube and on HILO's website. Immediate action tip. Occupiers and landlords need to think beyond the work that needs to get done in an office and co-create experiences that support good work. Consider all the various touchpoints for each person across technology, programming, content, services, and staffing. For more about how we can think about our work, place, and space differently, and the role of community and culture manifesting in different ways, read or listen to my book, Empathy Works, The Key to Competitive Advantage in the New Era of Work. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and like it. And why not write a quick review wherever you listen. For regular video updates, curated useful articles, research, and information, follow me on LinkedIn and sign up for my Work in Progress newsletter there. Thanks for listening. Until next time.